Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the dusty heart of the Middle East, where you'll walk on crumbling Ottoman roads, eavesdrop on colonial schemes in candlelit drawing rooms, and watch ancient cities change hands under a blazing sun. You're in Palestine, but not quite the one you know from today's headlines. It's 1914, and the world is sleepwalking into war. Empires are groaning, promises are flying, and the map is about to get wild. You'll march with British officers in polished boots, sip mint tea with suspicious locals, and try to keep your head while imperial powers draw imaginary lines through very real people as homes. Oh, and just so you know, you probably won't survive this one with a clean conscience. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. Always fun to see who's nodding off where. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge down a dusty alley in Jerusalem. The stone under your feet is cracked, smoothed by centuries of sandals and hoofbeats, and the scent of cardamom and goat hangs thick in the air. It's a quiet evening, too quiet. Because in the drawing rooms of Europe, decisions are being made that will send shockwaves through every olive grove and market stall in this part of the world. The Ottoman Empire technically still your rulers wheezing its last breath. For 400 years, it held sway here, not always effectively, and certainly not always gently. But its crescent flag flew over Jerusalem, Jaffa, and the rolling hills beyond. Yet now, it's 1914. And the Ottomans have just made a fateful choice. They rejoining the Central Powers in World War I, siding with Germany and Austria-Hungary. You, unfortunately, have no say in the matter. If you're an Arab villager, this war is distant thunder until the British and French show up with guns, gold, and grand promises. Help us fight the Ottomans, they say, and we'll give you independence. They wink. They whisper of Arab kingdoms, of freedom from Turkish taxes, of banners bearing your own stars and crescents. Enter Hussein bin Ali, Sharif of Meccan, elderly Arab noble who, from his stronghold in the Hejaz, begins to dream of an Arab revolt. In 1915, he exchanges letters with the British High Commissioner in Cairo, Sir Henry McMahon. These become the famous Hussein-McMahon correspondence, and they're vague, at best. You try to read them with a straight face. McMahon seems to promise support for an Arab state across much of the Levant, including Palestine. But then, he backpedals, fudges borders, and inserts qualifiers so slippery, you need a lawyer and a bottle of aspirin just to find your way through the paragraphs. Still, the Sharif is convinced, or perhaps just desperate, and in 1916, he rises. The Arab revolt begins. It's not quite Lawrence of Arabia levels of drama everywhere. But the British do send in T.E. Lawrence, who earns his desert legend by helping blow up trains and sabotage Ottoman outposts. You ride with him once, maybe twice, but mostly you wonder, what happens after the dust clears? Here's the cheeky bit. While the British are promising the Arabs independence, they're also scribbling secret plans with the French. That's Sykes-Picot, but we'll get there in a minute. For now, you sip some gritty Turkish coffee, scratch your beard, and wonder how many empires can promise the same land to different people without something catching fire. But it's not just the Arabs getting promises. In 1917, the British throw another card on the table, the Balfour Declaration. Just one paragraph, but oh, what a paragraph. It expresses support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Wait, so now the land is promised to Arabs and Jews. You look at the sky, wondering if anyone in London owns a map or a sense of consequence. But why the Balfour Declaration? That's the part historians still argue about. Some say it was religious sentiment, a Protestant sympathy for the return to Zion. Others point to geopolitical games, currying favor with influential Jewish communities in Europe and America to keep them on the Allied side. And then there's the more cynical take. Britain wanted a loyal foothold in the Middle East, and a Jewish homeland could be just the ticket. Still, the language of the declaration is careful, infuriatingly so. It mentions protecting the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, which sounds noble until you realize those communities make up 90% of the population. But hey, it's only one sentence, right? Meanwhile, the Ottomans are collapsing like a sandcastle at high tide. By 1918, British forces have swept through Palestine. You march beside them into Jerusalem, where General Allenby enters the city on foot out of respect. The city sighs. Another foreign power, another flag, another anthem echoing off the Dome of the Rock. Back in Europe, the war ends, but the promises are just beginning to unravel. You try to find Palestine on the map now. It's a blank space, a pawn in negotiations you'll never attend. The League of Nations begins handing out mandates, essentially colonial rule with a guilt-reducing name tag. Britain gets Palestine and Iraq. France gets Syria and Lebanon. The Arabs, they get a pat on the back and a shrug. Some call it betrayal. Others call it business as usual. Here's your quirky tidbit for the night. When British troops set up shop in Jerusalem, they struggle with one odd problem: signs. Street names are suddenly rendered in English, Hebrew, and Arabic, but no one can agree on the order. At one point, zealots begin blacking out the Arabic or Hebrew parts, depending on their sympathies. British soldiers find themselves repainting signs over and over, sighing into their tea. You stand under one of those signs now. The letters shimmer in the heat, and the city bustles around you, vendors shouting, camels grumbling, old men playing backgammon in the shade. Beneath it all, a sense of unease grows. Too many promises, too few truths. And the real map, it's not drawn in ink. It's being drawn in feelings, in land sales, in whispered rumors, and stolen glances. The Arabs wait for their independence. The Zionists wait for their homeland. The British wait for the next report from Whitehall. Meanwhile, you wait under a tree that's seen more empires come and go than you can count. The mandate is coming, boots polished, files in hand. But tonight, you drift in that uncertain in-between between war and peace. Hope and disillusionment, promises made and promises broken. You're standing in a grand old room in London, where the wallpaper is peeling politely and the fireplace hasn't worked properly since Queen Victoria. It's 1916, and two men with excellent mustaches are hunched over a map. One is British. Sir Mark Sykes, posh, persuasive, and allergic to ambiguity. The other is French. Francois Georges-Picot, stiff as a starch collar and twice as fond of neat boundaries. They redoing something that would be funny if it weren't so permanent. They recarving up the Middle East with ink and ambition. No one in Palestine has been invited, of course. You hover behind them as they draw lines across places. You know Aleppo, Mosul, Gaza's if they were simply rearranging the furniture. This, right here, is the infamous Sykes-Picot Agreement, a secret deal between Britain and France with a wink from Russia to divvy up the Ottoman lands before the war's even won. It's like choosing rooms in a house that isn't technically for sale yet. Sykes draws a blue line across the map. Picot adjusts it slightly to preserve a French foothold on the Mediterranean. They sip tepid tea, debate coastal access, and agree that Britain will control the area around Baghdad and Basra, while France gets Syria and Lebanon. And Palestine, that's the mystery box. It's marked for international administration, though no one defines what that means. You could interpret it generously, but given how European powers have handled colonies so far, you'd be wise not to. The joke, if you can call it that, is how out of touch these men are. Sykes once described Arabs as an unspoiled child, which probably tells you more about him than it does about anyone he was supposedly helping. Picot, for his part, seemed determined to uphold French influence in the Levant, if it meant pushing Arabic nationalism off a cliff. You lean over their shoulders and mutter, maybe ask the people who live there. But no one hears you over the sound of geopolitical ambition. When the agreement is eventually leaked by the Bolsheviks in 1917, after they take over Russia and go full transparency mode, there's outrage. Arabs, especially those who trusted the British and fought the Ottomans, feel utterly betrayed. So wait, while they were revolting, bleeding, and dreaming of independence, the British were already planning to give their land away. Historians still argue whether Britain ever really intended to honor Arab independence, or whether Sykes-Picot always reflected the real plan. Either way, the damage is done. Arab trust in Britain takes a sharp nosedive, and it's not coming back anytime soon. Meanwhile, back in Palestine, the Ottomans are still clinging on, barely. The British keep pushing north, city by city. In 1917, they take Jerusalem. In 1918, they reach Damascus, helped along by Arab forces. You walk through the aftermath, seeing Turkish barracks abandoned, local elites scrambling to guess their new loyalties, and British flags fluttering where crescents once flew. The physical map of the region hasn't changed much yet, but the mental map has cracked wide open. Here is a fun little footnote for your troubles. Sykes once tried to make friends with various Arab tribes by introducing the Union Jack alongside a star and crescent, hoping it would feel inclusive. Instead, people were just confused. Is this a new country, they'd ask, or a strange magic trick? You carry a copy of that proposed flag in your pocket? It looks like someone spilled empire and hope on the same cloth. While London and Paris draw lines, the locals draw breath. The British military administration takes over Palestine temporarily, issuing orders in English, Arabic, and Hebrew. You visit the administrative HQ in Jerusalem and marvel at how many filing cabinets it takes to not govern a place properly. Jewish communities, scattered and small, begin to see a flicker of possibility. The Balfour Declaration has sparked hope, and some Zionist leaders begin arriving in Jerusalem cautious, idealistic, suspicious of British motives but willing to work with them for now. Arab communities, by contrast, feel the ground shifting. Fast, some leaders try to organize. Others retreat into silence. Still others write indignant letters that disappear into the great bureaucratic abyss. No one's quite sure who owns what anymore. Land records are patchy. Deeds vanish. And while Europe debates, mandates, and treaties, Palestinian farmers just want to know if the tax collector will come before harvest. Then, in 1920, you find yourself in San Remo, Italy, a lovely resort town, frankly. But the meeting here is deadly serious. The Allied powers are formalizing the post-war order. They confirm that Britain will receive the mandate over Palestine, while France gets Syria and Lebanon. The mandate sounds nice, doesn't it? Like a gentle suggestion. In reality, it's colonialism in new packaging, wrapped in the language of tutelage and preparation for self-governance. You roll your eyes, but no one notices under all the velvet drapes. Britain's job, officially, is to prepare Palestine for independence while simultaneously facilitating the establishment of a Jewish national home. You don't need a degree in political science to see the inherent tension here. You just need ears and a sense of smell. Because something doesn't add up. By 1922, the League of Nations finalizes the text of the mandate. You sit in the corner as it's read aloud, wincing at the contradictions. It recognizes the historical connection of the Jewish people to Palestine and supports immigration. But it also says nothing should harm the rights of existing non-Jewish communities. It's like being told you read both the guest and the host at the same dinner and no one is sure who is paying the bill. You walk back through Jerusalem and feel the change in the air. New Jewish neighborhoods are springing up. British soldiers patrol with stiff mustaches and sunburned noses. Arabic newspapers grow bolder in tone. Hebrew newspapers overflow with editorials, poetry, and land advertisements. One quirky trend starts to emerge. typewriters adapted to handle both Hebrew and Arabic keyboards. You spot one in a shop window, keys mismatched, spacebar sticky, but somehow still working. It's a clunky metaphor for coexistence, sure. But at least someone's trying. Not everyone is pleased. In rural areas, rumors spread faster than facts. You ride through a village where people believe the British are about to convert all the mosques into cathedrals. In another town, there's talk of a secret Zionist tunnel under the Temple Mount. None of it's true, but it doesn't have to be. Fear doesn't need footnotes. The lines on the map are now dry, permanent, and imperial. But on the ground, they blur and bend. You meet a Christian Arab teacher in Haifa who speaks 4 languages and teaches in 2 scripts. She doesn't care who governs, she just wants her students to graduate. You meet a young Jewish boy in Tel Aviv, living in a shack near the dunes, whose parents came from Poland with nothing but hope and a harmonica. He's never seen snow, but dreams of orchards. And then you, a tired traveler on the edge of empire. Sit between them, one eye on the paper lines, the other on the people those lines are supposed to contain. Maps are funny things. They pretend to explain everything, but hide more than they reveal. And this map, born in back rooms, scribbled in secrecy, and passed off as destinies about to take you deeper into the contradictions. That will define a century. You're standing in a long hallway in Whitehall, London. Everything smells faintly of polished wood and pipe smoke. A clerk in a stiff collar hurries past, holding a single sheet of paper. Just one. Not a treaty, not a declaration of war, just a letter. And yet, this one piece of paper is about to change the world. It's November 2nd, 1917, and the letter is headed to Lord Rothschild, a leader in the British Jewish community. It's signed by Arthur James Balfour, Britain's Foreign Secretary. You lean in as the words are read aloud, gently, politely. Devastatingly, His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. You blink. A national home in Palestine. While the war still rages in Europe, while the Ottomans are still in control of the land, while 90% of the people living there are not Jewish. You look around, expecting someone to raise their hand and say, "Wait, has anyone asked the locals?" But the room is quiet. Too quiet. The Balfour Declaration, as it comes to be called, is one of those historical moments that seems simple on the surface and wildly combustible underneath. The British thought they were being clever, make a grand gesture, win the goodwill of influential Jewish figures worldwide, and secure support for the Allied war effort. But they had no idea what they'd just done. Maybe they did and simply hoped for the best. Classic. You find yourself stepping onto a ship bound for Palestine in 1918, the war finally over. British troops march into cities, planting flags with ceremonial precision. They claim they're liberators. The locals aren't so sure. You pass a street in Jaffa where vendors speak in Arabic, Yiddish, Greek, and Ladino, all in the same afternoon. Multilingual, multicultural, and deeply unsure of the future. Word of the Balfour Declaration spreads like wildfire. Jewish communities in Europe celebrate. Some weep. For centuries, Jews have wandered without a homeland. Now, maybe, just maybe, they'll return to Zion. Synagogues echo with prayers of hope. But in the villages and towns of Palestine, Arab communities read the declaration with something colder. Confusion, then disbelief, then anger. You sit in a cafe in Nablus, where a group of local notables pass the letter around in stunned silence. What does this mean? One mutters. Do we not exist? The British try to soothe both sides. They insist the Jewish national home won't endanger Arab rights. But what exactly is a national home? A state, a province, a spiritual center? The British won't say. Maybe they don't know. Historians still argue whether Balfour himself ever understood what he was unleashing. The mandate officially begins in 1920. You walk with the new British High Commissioner, Sir Herbert Samuel, who, awkwardly, is Jewish, pointing him as either a symbol of British inclusivity or a political misstep with legs. He tries to reassure the Arab population. He visits mosques. He meets with community leaders. He drinks a lot of tea. It's not enough. In 1921, riots break out in Jaffa. You're there, ducking behind crates of oranges as violence surges through the streets. Arabs attack Jewish neighborhoods. British troops struggle to restore order. The casualty list is long, and the tension gets deeper, tighter, more suffocating. What triggered it? The usual mix? Land sales, immigration, rumors, British policies, long-held fears, and that same old ghost uncertainty. You realize that people can endure hardship, even occupation. But what they cannot endure is being left in the dark about their future. And immigration, it's starting to climb. Jewish settlers, mostly from Eastern Europe, begin arriving in greater numbers. They speak Hebrew, Russian, Polish. Some are fleeing pogroms. Others come with dreams of farming the land, building a new society. They establish kibbutzim collective farms run with socialist zeal and very few shower facilities. You visit one outside Haifa. The sun is brutal. The young men and women wear sandals, smear themselves with thick mud to keep bugs off, and sing folk songs while digging irrigation ditches. It's idealistic. It's exhausting. It's also profoundly political. You ask one of the workers why they came. To make the desert bloom, she says, smiling. You glance around. There are olive trees, ancient terraces. The desert, it turns out, wasn't quite empty to begin with. That's the uncomfortable truth no one likes to talk about. Zionists view the land as a rebirth. Arabs see it as a displacement. Both narratives exist. Both are deeply felt. And you, caught in the middle, feel your stomach twist when a shepherd tells you his land was just sold without his knowing by a distant landlord in Beirut. But here's your quirky tidbit. Around this time, a group of British officials are tasked with designing postage stamps for mandatory Palestine. To avoid favoring any one group, they label everything in three languages: English, Hebrew, Arabic. But the Hebrew text reads Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. Arab communities protest furiously. British officials, flustered, try to explain that it's just a translation. It is, and it isn't. Tiny details. Big meanings. You attend a town meeting in Jerusalem where Arab leaders argue that the Balfour Declaration must be rescinded. Others say they'll never accept British rule. Some talk of rebellion. One older man just stares at the wall, eyes distant. It was ours, he says, before the papers, before the promises. Meanwhile, the British continue to build their administration. More bureaucracy, more roads, more files in triplicate. You overhear a clerk complain that they need more typewriters. His colleague says, we need more clarity first. Then comes 1922. Winston Churchill, as colonial secretary, issues the white paper attempt to explain Britain's position. He says the Balfour Declaration doesn't mean turning all of Palestine into a Jewish state, just a home within it. He says Arabs have nothing to fear. You read it, slowly, carefully, and come away more confused than before. The contradiction at the heart of the mandate between supporting Jewish immigration and protecting Arab rights is becoming harder to manage. It's like standing on two moving trains, both headed in different directions and pretending it's perfectly safe. One afternoon, you sit in a small shop in Hebron where an old man is mending shoes. He offers you tea. You accept. His radio crackles out the voice of an Egyptian singer. And for a moment, the tension vanishes. The city is peaceful. The future seems distant, but it's only a moment. Because the real map is still shifting, Jewish immigrants keep arriving. Arabs keep organizing. British soldiers keep standing in the middle. rifles held awkwardly, unsure which direction is truly forward. You feel it now, the slow tightening of the story, Kaka, the press of people, of politics, of hope and fear. The Balfour Declaration was only one paragraph, but you're starting to realize that even the shortest sentences can echo for centuries. You're trudging through the narrow corridors of British bureaucracy, clutching a stack of crumpled papers that somehow weigh more than a camel saddle. It's 1923, and the British mandate over Palestine is no longer an idea on a map, it's reality. The British Empire, with all its tweet and telegrams, has moved in for real, teeing flagpoles and filing cabinets across this ancient land. You walk into Government House in Jerusalem, an elegant villa turned imperial nerve center. Inside, there's a symphony of shuffling papers, clinking teaspoons, and the occasional exasperated sigh from a civil servant whose mustache has wilted in the afternoon heat. The British didn't just bring their laws, they brought their weather complaints. Sir Herbert Samuel is still in charge, Britain's first High Commissioner for Palestine. He's Jewish, a Zionist sympathizer, and for many, a symbol of hope or threat, depending on where you're standing. He's trying to walk a tightrope between competing visions. Armed only with good intentions, a thick accent, and a solid umbrella, the mandate is now the law of the land. British soldiers in khaki patrol dusty roads. British judges in white wigs settle disputes in echoing chambers. British engineers lay railway lines through terrain that never asked for such tracks. You ride a train from Haifa to Jerusalem. The engine huffs like a grumpy uncle. The cars sway gently, and everyone on board avoids eye contact. Arabs, Jews, British soldiers, Saul, jammed into compartments, all pretending not to see the tension gathering in the corners. Here, S the thing. The mandate isn't just governance, it's a giant balancing act on a tightrope strung across cultural, religious, and political cliffs. The British say their job is to prepare the land for self-governance. But how do you do that when two communities want very different futures? You can't give a single baton to two runners headed in opposite directions. The British solution? Paperwork. So much paperwork. Permits, regulations, land deeds, immigration quotas. You visit a land registration office in Jaffa, where the queue stretches out the door and into next week. A clerk stamps forms with the enthusiasm of a man who's lost the will to blink. And those forms owe the chaos. Many Palestinian Arabs don't have official land deeds. Their ownership is based on custom, tradition, and memory. But the British want signatures, serial numbers, boundaries drawn to the inch. So suddenly, land once passed from grandfather to grandson over tea and handshake is now up for dispute. This, you realize, is how bureaucratic control becomes political power. Because whoever can navigate the red tape fastest usually wins. Meanwhile, the Jewish Agency effectively a proto-government for the Yishuv. The Jewish community in Palestine's growing stronger. It sets up schools, hospitals, banks. You walk through Tel Aviv and see it. Neat rows of whitewashed buildings, citrus groves carefully tended, kids in short pants learning Hebrew under blossoming almond trees. This is not just settlement, it's a vision, and it's organized. Zionist leaders, both secular and religious, are building parallel structures that increasingly look like a future state, waiting. You drop by a kibbutz one morning. The rooster is unforgiving, the porridge unseasoned, but the idealism is palpable. A young woman with calloused hands and a sunburned neck explains the dream: equality, land, community. You look around, everyone shares everything: tools, shoes, even toothbrushes. Still, it's not just about farming. It's about claiming space. Every grove planted is a flag, every tent a message. We are here, we're not leaving. Arab communities watch all this with growing concern. You sip tea in a village near Tulkarm, listening to a local elder talk about how land once considered communal has now been sold, sometimes by absentee landlords in Beirut or Damascus, to Jewish organizations. Families are evicted. Fields are fenced. And anger simmers. Here's your quirky tidbit. In 1924, British officials attempted to produce a tourism brochure for Palestine. It featured Roman ruins, Crusader castles. The Sea of Galilee described Tel Aviv as a promising coastal suburb. By 1930, Tel Aviv had its own mayor, police force, and opera. Suburb, no more. And the Mandate government? They're stuck. Every time they try to smooth the conflict, they end up sharpening it. British policies try to regulate immigration, allowing a reasonable number of Jews to settle, while promising not to prejudice Arab rights. But the math doesn't work. You can pour more into a pot that is already boiling and expect no one to get burned. The Arabs begin organizing. In 1920, they held a general strike to protest British policies and Zionist immigration. In 1921, more riots. You try to mediate a conversation between Arab leaders and British officials, but it's like juggling lit torches in a barn full of hay. The British military presence increases. Mounted police ride through the countryside. Checkpoints pop up. Curfews begin to flicker on and off like faulty light bulbs. You pass through a village under dusk lockdown, the streets silent except for the clop of hooves and a baby crying behind a shuttered window. One of the most remarkable dynamics now is how modern this ancient land is becoming. British engineers pave roads over Roman ones. Telegraph lines hum alongside shepherd paths. You stand on a ridge where 2,000 years ago, travelers followed stars. Now, they follow railway timetables. Yet despite all this progress, something older and heavier presses down on everything. Fear. Fear that land is being lost. Fear that identity is slipping. Fear that someone else's dream will become your nightmare. You hear it in the voices of school teachers who wonder what language their students should be learning. You hear it from farmers who can read the deeds that say their land is no longer theirs. And you hear it from Jewish immigrants, too, who carry their own trauma, their own fears of rejection and persecution, who whisper in Yiddish when Hebrew feels too hopeful. Historians still argue whether the British ever had a real plan. Some say they were improvising, trying to hold a burning rope with both hands. Others claim they deliberately played both sides, fueling division to maintain control. The truth, like most things in this story, probably sits in the gray fog between intentions and outcomes. You stop in a Jerusalem shop that sells postcards. A rack spins slowly in the breeze images of domes, deserts, and camels. But the back of the cards tell another story, addressed to cousins in Warsaw, uncles in Cairo, friends in Baghdad. Everyone's writing, asking, what is happening? Should we come? Should we stay? And what's your answer? You don't have one. Because even now, in these early years of the British Mandate, you see where this road leads. Each policy memo, each land deal, each seemingly harmless railway station becomes a stone in a wall that grows higher with each passing year. Tonight, as you sit on a rooftop in Jerusalem, the lights of the city sparkle below. You hear the call to prayer, then bells, then a burst of Hebrew song from a school nearby. It's a layered sound, scape beautiful, aching, unresolved. And you realize, the British have arrived with their order and officers, their stamps and slogans. But this place resists simplicity. It always has. You're walking down a freshly swept boulevard in Tel Aviv. Barefoot for once because the sand keeps getting into your boots anyway. It's the early 1920s, and the air smells like orange blossoms and fresh plaster. Tel Aviv is just a teenager, now barely 2 decades old, but already it's buzzing with a kind of hopeful madness. The city's growing like a weed, sprouting bookstores and socialist committees faster than you can blink. This is where the second Aliyah has left its mark. You remember them, the Jewish immigrants who arrived in waves from Eastern Europe before the war, followed by a new flood of newcomers now that the Ottoman curtain has lifted. They've brought their languages, their ideals, and their calloused hands. You sit at a sidewalk cafe and overhear someone debating Tolstoy in Hebrew, a version of Hebrew, because this is where the language itself is being reborn. You listen to school children practicing pronunciation that hasn't been used in daily life for nearly 2,000 years. It's not just revival, it's resurrection. These immigrants don't just want refuge, they want revolution of the gentle, muddy, farm-built kind. And that's how you find yourself ankle-deep in irrigation water at your first kibbutz. The soil is sticky and stubborn. The sun punishes you. Chickens roost on things they shouldn't, but somehow, everyone's grinning. Welcome to Degania, the first kibbutz, founded in 1910, but now serving as a model for dozens more. Life here is deliberately hard. Communal, egalitarian, at least on paper. You eat from shared bowls, take turns doing laundry, and sleep in simple rooms cooled by the night wind and not much else. Decisions are made by vote. Everyone has a job, even the poet, who's currently mending a chicken coop. You ask what drives them. To build a new Jew, someone says, one who tills the land, defends it, and never bows. You nod, though your back is already sore. Not all new immigrants go rural. In cities like Haifa and Jerusalem, Jewish neighborhoods blossom with culture and industry. Hebrew newspapers stack high at the newsstands. You wander into a school where a teacher draws a map of Eretz Yisrael on the chalkboard while quoting from the book of Isaiah and a Russian botanist in the same breath. In the north, new towns are popping up, Kfar Saba, Hadera, Petah Tikva, founded on the sweat of idealists and often purchased from absentee landlords who never set foot on the land. And therein lies the seed of conflict. You hitch a ride on a donkey cart through the Jezreel Valley. The fields roll out like green patchwork and Jewish settlers work under wide-brimmed hats. But nearby, you meet Arab tenant farmers who were evicted when the land changed hands. My family worked this earth for generations, one says, but now a stranger holds the deed. It's a pattern playing out across the mandate. Zionist organizations, most notably the Jewish National Fund, buy land legally, but often from wealthy families in cities far away. The new owners don't want the tenants, they want to build their own society, self-sufficient, Hebrew-speaking, and proudly modern. You stand at the edge of a newly fenced plot. On one side, a fresh grove of citrus trees. On the other, an Arab shepherd with no place left to graze. The line between idealism and displacement is razor thin. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, British officials issue new regulations, more immigration quotas, new housing permits, tighter controls. You sit in on a meeting with an officer whose biggest concern today is whether official stamps should bear the crown insignia or something more local. As always, the paperwork misses the point. Here, your quirky tidbit. Some kibbutzim set up collective libraries where you, Dan T, borrow a book you read it aloud in group sessions, then argue about it for hours. One particular kibbutz voted to ban romantic poetry, claiming it undermined the productivity of plowing. You read a smuggled copy under your blanket anyway. Rebels never rest. By 1925, over 100,000 Jews live in Palestine, about 12% of the population. The Yeshuv, as the community is called, has its own schools, hospitals, labor unions, and militias. A state in embryo. Not officially, not legally, but you can see its spine forming beneath the surface. You walk through a construction site where a Hebrew theater is going up, funded by donations from Warsaw and New York. The architect wears a fedora and whistles Mozart. We're building culture, he says, so the bullets won't be the only thing that speaks. The labor movement is strong. You attend a meeting of the Histadrut, the General Federation of Jewish Labor. The room smells like sweat and ambition. They're discussing wages, housing, and most importantly, how to ensure Jewish labor is prioritized. Hebrew work for Hebrew hands, the slogan goes. It sounds noblant, till you realize it often means excluding Arab workers who once worked those same jobs. Arab dock workers are pushed out of ports. Arab stonemasons lose contracts to Jewish labor teams. This isn't just a workers' movement, it's nation building by brick and salary. Arab leaders begin to notice. You sit with a mayor in Nablus who's compiling a report on lost lands, evictions, and the growing economic divide. They don't just want to live beside us, he says. They want to live without us. He's not entirely wrong. The Zionist project isn't aimed at assimilation, aimed at sovereignty. Separate institutions, separate identity, parallel lanes speeding in opposite directions. Historians still argue whether this separation was inevitable or engineered. Some say it was a defense mechanism, a way to preserve identity and safety in a hostile environment. Others point to a more calculated effort to replace, not integrate. And where are the British in all this? They're referees in a game where both sides think the other one cheated first. Their policies wobble between appeasing Zionist hopes and soothing Arab anxieties, pleasing no one for long. In 1925, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem opens its gates. You're there for the ceremony. People cry. People laugh. People argue over whether Albert Einstein should be allowed to speak. It's a proud moment, though even education becomes political when knowledge is power. Back in the kibbutz, you help lay pipe for a new water line. Your arms ache. The sun dips low, casting long shadows over the tilled rows. A child walks by humming a Hebrew lullaby made from old melodies and new words. You think of that shepherd, the teacher, the stonemason, the poet, all trying to write their futures on the same patch of earth, but with different pens, different dreams. And the British, clipboard in hand, still think they can keep the peace with another committee meeting. Tonight, as you sit on a rooftop in Tel Aviv, you watch young lovers stroll by in the moonlight. You hear the hum of new music, part Russian, part Yemenite, part something else entirely. You hear the beat of a new society being built brick by brick, note by note. And somewhere beyond the glow of the city, in the hills and valleys that haven't changed in centuries, another society watches, waits, wonders what's coming next. You wake to the sound of a market coming alive, metal shutters rolling up, the staccato slap of vegetables onto stalls, and someone shouting about tomatoes like they're national treasures. It's Jerusalem in 1929, and the city feels like it's standing on a crack in the earth. The morning is warm, but the tension is warmer. You feel it in the stairs, the muttered prayers, the nervous soldiers polishing bayonets in the shade. And all of its every thread of suspicion, fear, and fury is about to snap. It starts, as things often do here, with a wall. The Western Wall, to be exact. Jews pray there daily, pressing their hands and foreheads to ancient stones, placing folded notes into cracks. To them, it's the last surviving remnant of the Second Temple. Sacred, irreplaceable. But just above it stands the Haram al-Sharif the Noble. Sanctuary where the Al-Aqsa Mosque and Dome of the Rock rise in sunlit silence. To Muslims, this is the third holiest site in Islam. Sacred, irreplaceable. Two groups, one wall, and a British administration in the middle, praying for the impossible. Neutrality. In the summer of 1929, Jewish activists begin bringing benches and a screen to the Western Wall, hoping to make it more formal, more structured. This raises alarms among Muslim religious authorities who see it as a creeping claim on the compound above. Rumors spread, leaflets fly. Someone gives a speech, then another. Then fists are clenched, knives pocketed, and the match strikes. You're there when it begins August 23rd, a Friday. A rumor has spread that Jews are attacking Al-Aqsa. A crowd gathers, then a stone is thrown, then 10. You duck behind a fruit cart as the chaos ignites like dry grass. What follows is swift and brutal. Riots erupt across Jerusalem, Hebron saved. In Hebron, it turns into a massacre. You walk the narrow alleys, a day too late, books torn from shelves, doors kicked in, blood where there should be prayer rugs. 67 Jews killed. Entire communities vanish overnight. Arab neighbors who once shared meals now shared nothing but silence. In retaliation, Jewish groups strike back, especially in Saft. It's not just a riot anymore, it's mutual rage. Old wounds reopen, fresh ones join them. The British are caught flat-footed. Soldiers race from city to city, trying to put out fires literal and figurative. They impose curfews, fire warning shots, and scribble reports as if paper can absorb blood. When the dust settles, nearly 250 people are dead, hundreds more injured, and something intangible is broken. You see it in the faces. That raw, haunted look that says coexistence just took a punch to the ribs. Historians still argue what triggered the 1929 riots. Was it a calculated uprising, spontaneous combustion? A reaction to years of fear and resentment suddenly given form? The short answer? All of it. The long answer? Still unfolding. And where are the British in all this? Commissioning another inquiry, of course. Enter the Shaw Commission, named after Sir Walter Shaw, man whose mustache arrives 5 seconds before he does. You attend one of the sessions in Jerusalem. It's dry, formal, uncomfortable. Arabs testify about land, fear, lost jobs. Jews testify about immigration, ancient rights, shattered dreams. The commission nods, writes, sighs. Their conclusion: Arab violence was wrong. But so were British policies. The mandate's twin goals, supporting a Jewish national home and protecting Arab rights, were incompatible without serious adjustments. You want to applaud. But then you remember, conclusions don't stop riots. So in 1930, Britain issues a new white paper. It recommends limiting Jewish immigration and land purchases. A warning shot, a political break. A message that Britain might actually favor equilibrium over ideology. Zionist leaders react with alarm. Chaim Weizmann, one of the movement's most articulate voices, describes it as betrayal. You find him pacing in a Tel Aviv office, his fingers stained with ink, muttering that history is being rewritten in the wrong direction. Arab leaders, on the other hand, feel a flicker of hope. Maybe they're listening, says one merchant in Nablus. Maybe they finally see we're not just background, but don't get too comfortable. That white paper, shelved within months. Under pressure from British Jews and international Zionist organizations, the recommendations are quietly forgotten. Immigrants keep coming. Land keeps changing hands. And resentment keeps ripening. Here's your quirky tidbit. After the 1929 riots, British authorities considered issuing rubber truncheons to officers because they realized that shooting into crowds probably wasn't the best long-term strategy. We'll beat them more gently, one officer jokes, grimly. The idea was shelved 2 turns out. Truncheons weren't budget-friendly. Back in Hebron, the Jewish community has largely vanished. Some families return years later. Others never will. You walk through abandoned houses, shutters creaking. Mezuzahs still nailed 2 door frames, dust thick enough to write regret into. And yet, life doesn't stop. In Tel Aviv, cafes reopen. Students return to Hebrew University. New immigrants arrive, this time from Poland and Germany, where dark clouds are starting to gather. You meet a young couple who fled with nothing but a violin and a recipe for gefilte fish. They're dazed but determined. We came to build, they say, not to fight. But the soil here doesn't always allow you to choose. The Arab community, too, is shifting. The Palestinian Arab leadership, historically dominated by notable families and cautious diplomacy, begins to feel pressure from below. Young men join militias. Nationalist newspapers grow bolder. You sit in a smoky cafe where someone openly calls for a general uprising. You cannot plant one people, he says, without uprooting another. You sip your coffee quietly, knowing both sides feel planted and uprooted at the same time. In the countryside, resistance becomes more organized. A pamphlet appears in your coat pocket one morning. Boycott British goods. Do not sell land. Resist the occupier. It's written in elegant Arabic, folded like origami and laced with urgency. The mandate's legal framework tries to hold. But law without trust is like scaffolding without bricks. Every policy now feels like a loaded question. You watch a courtroom trial in Jerusalem. An Arab farmer, accused of trespassing on land, recently sold to a Jewish settlement. The British judge listens, nods, rules in favor of the deed holder. The farmer is escorted out, eyes burning. Justice was served, but was it justice? Historians still argue about this period. Was British policy simply unworkable? Or was it sabotage by indecision, trying to please both sides and failing both? As you ride a mule across the Galilee hills, you think about all those parallel lives. The Arab peasant growing olives, the Jewish nurse working in a Haifa clinic, the British officer sitting in a parlor wondering how the empire got dragged into this mess. Everyone has a story. No one's story feels safe. You stop by a village well as the sun dips low. Children are splashing water. A grandmother sings a lullaby older than any border. Then, from the radio on a nearby stoop, a Hebrew news broadcast crackles in immigration numbers, speeches, warnings. And just like that, the spell breaks. The tension is back. It never left. You walk home under a sky full of stars and smoke. And you know, deep in your tired bones, that 1929 wasn't just a riot. It was a rupture, and the fault line isn't closing. Not with time, not with treaties, not with truncheons. You're walking beside a train platform in Haifa, watching suitcases pile higher than logic should allow. The year is 1933, and something terrible is happening far away, but its ripples are already crashing into the shores of Palestine. Germany has just elected a man with a mustache so sharp it could cut glass. His name, Hitler. And his rise is not just a political shift, it's an earthquake in slow motion. You meet the first wave of refugees from Central Europe almost immediately. Ashen-faced, overdressed for the climate, they step off the boats holding German dictionaries, ration books, and pianos they'll never play again. They're stunned. They're grateful. They're terrified. One family offers you schnitzel from a paper-wrapped lunch. The mother laughs, nervously. We thought this was temporary. You nod, and don't have the heart to say that history rarely is. This is the fifth Aliyatins of thousands of Jews fleeing Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia. By 1936, nearly 60,000 will arrive in a single year. That's not immigration anymore. That's a demographic earthquake. You walk into a Tel Aviv cafe and realize that half the tables are speaking German. The newcomers bring capital, businesses, opera companies, neurologists, architects. It's the most educated refugee wave the Yishuv has seen, and with it comes prosperity, anxiety, and a whole new sense of urgency. Jewish institutions expand overnight. The Hebrew University grows fast. Hospitals sprout extra wings. Banks buzz with deposits. You tour a newly built neighborhood with Bauhaus architecture, clean lines, white walls, balconies for catching the Mediterranean breeze. It looks like Europe has crash-landed in the Levant. But while this all looks like success from the inside, from the outside, it looks like takeover. Arab communities are watching this transformation with widening eyes and clenched fists. The land they once dominated is shifting under their feet. Jewish land purchases increase. So does unemployment among Arabs. So do prices. So does fear. You sit in a village near Tulkarm, listening to the mayor mutter over census figures. It's not just land anymore, he says. It's identity. And here's your quirky tidbit. During this time, some German Jews try opening with full Viennese service linens, cakes, chamber music. It doesn't exactly catch on. The locals prefer thick coffee and gossip. One British officer quips, "They've fled oppression and brought us strudel." But jokes can't paper over the pressure. Tensions are bubbling again. In 1936, the pot boils over. It starts with a general Arab strike that shuts down shops, ports, and railroads. It lasts 6 months. That's not a protest. That's a full-blown rebellion. You walk through shuttered markets. the silence is eerie. Tel Aviv's port is suddenly booming because Jaffa's is frozen. And behind that silence, weapons begin to appear: smuggled rifles, stolen revolvers, home-forged knives. The Arab revolt has begun. You hide in a barn outside Nablus while a group of young Arab rebels hold a meeting. They speak in low tones about freedom, betrayal, and something darker: revenge. The British have played us, one says, and the Jews are taking everything. But it's not just about the Jews. This revolt is also against the British and against the Arab elite who failed to stop what's coming. It's about dignity, about land, about feeling invisible. British soldiers begin rolling through towns in armored cars, checkpoints, curfews, raids. One morning, you watch a squad blow the front off a stone house just to make a point. They confiscate radios, ban newspapers, arrest teenage boys whose crime was being in the wrong alley at the wrong time. The revolt grows. Rebels attack railway lines, police stations, Jewish settlements. The Yishuv responds with its own defense forces: first, the Haganah, then a splinter group called Irgun, more militant, more direct. You meet a young Irgun fighter sharpening a knife behind a Tel Aviv bakery. He's barely 20. "We won't be sheep," he says. "Not this time." The fear in his voice isn't of Arabs. It's of history repeating itself. The British, they panic. They import troops from India, build new forts, and recruit thousands of Jewish auxiliaries to guard roads, bridges, outposts. You spot one such unit in the Galilee, learning how to fire rifles and boil tea simultaneously. It works militarily, at least. By 1939, the revolt is crushed. Over 5,000 Arabs are dead. Hundreds hanged or imprisoned. Villages burned. Leadership scattered. But no one has really won. The ground is scorched and the trust is ash. You return to Haifa. A Jewish bus drives past an Arab bus stop. No one looks up. No one waves. It's as if the entire land is being slowly partitioned, not with walls, but with silence. In London, British politicians are panicking for different reasons. War is on the horizon. Hitler is threatening Europe, and they need Middle Eastern oil and Arab cooperation. So they draft a new policy, the 1939 White Paper. It flips the script. Immigration will now be capped: only 75,000 Jews allowed into Palestine over 5 years. Land sales will be restricted. The promise of a Jewish national home quietly withdrawn. You read it once, then twice. It's the clearest break Britain's ever made with Zionism. Arab leaders celebrate. They finally listened, someone says. But you don't feel relief, you feel dread. Because at that very moment, Europe is cracking apart. Jewish leaders in Palestine read the White Paper with fury and despair. As Hitler's shadow spreads, as borders close, as Jewish communities in Poland, Germany, Austria scream for refuge, Britain slams the door. David Ben-Gurion, head of the Jewish Agency, puts it bluntly: "We shall fight the White Paper as if there is no war, and we shall fight the war as if there is no White Paper." It's a neat quote, but it captures something terrifying. The Jews of Palestine will soon fight on to fronts against the British, and with them, against the policies that deny their people entry, and with them against the Nazis murdering their kin. Historians still argue whether the White Paper was realpolitik, betrayal, or both. Arab leaders saw it as a victory. Zionists saw it as a death sentence. And you, straddling the fault line, feel it splitting deeper. By 1939, over 450,000 Jews live in Palestine, about 30% of the population. The Yishuv is stronger than ever. But so is the divide. You walk through Jerusalem one quiet evening, past shuttered shops and new construction sites. A stone mosque glows under the moonlight. A synagogue stands not far away, its roof still unfinished. The wind picks up, a newspaper flutters down the street. You catch it, glance at the headline: "War in Europe imminent." Everything is about to change. Again? You're standing on a sun-drenched rooftop in Jerusalem, 1940. The wind is dry, and the radio hums with static and sorrow. World War II has exploded across the globe, and Palestine, though not yet a battlefield, is once again a crossroads. This time, it feels like the world's entire weight is shifting through it. Below, the streets buzz with uncertainty. British soldiers drill in the courtyard. Jewish youths deliver newspapers by bike. Arab merchants watch the world turn with narrowed eyes and folded arms. The mandate hasn't collapsed yet, but it's swaying and you can feel it in your knees. You're swept into a recruitment center near Haifa. British posters hang crookedly. Enlist for king and country. But something's changed. The line isn't British, it's full of young Jews volunteering to fight Hitler. Not because they love the empire, but because they understand something chilling. No one else is coming to save their families. Thousands enlist. In the desert, in Europe, in the RAF. You meet a 20-year-old from Tel Aviv who joins a British commando unit. If we don't fight Nazis there, he says, adjusting his rifle strap, we'll be fighting them here. You nod. It's not patriotism, it's desperation dressed up in uniform. Meanwhile, in the Arab community, things are different. Memories of the 1936 to 1939 revolt are still raw. Thousands are in exile, in prison, or lying under stones with no names. Cooperation with the British is thin, if it exists at all. Some Arabs do serve, yes, but fewer. Distrust runs too deep. And beyond Palestine, Arab nationalist leaders like Haj Amin al-Husani, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, flee British reach entirely. You follow his trail to Berlin, of all places where he offers support to the Nazis. Yes, really. You sip tea in a Cairo cafe and hear the news whispered through clenched teeth. The Mufti's handshake with fascists has shocked many Arabs, but also reinforced a narrative one where both sides feel betrayed and backed into impossible corners. Historians still argue how much influence the Mufti really had in Berlin. Was he a pawn or a partner? Did he plot genocide or merely seek allies against the British and Zionists? The answers remain foggy, uncomfortable, and far from simple. Back in Palestine, you're riding a packed bus from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Jewish passengers talk about letters from Poland that stopped coming months ago, about entire towns gone quiet, about shadows in train stations. They know before the world does what silence means. They call it Shoah, catastrophe. And here's your quirky tidbit. Despite tight immigration quotas, Zionist groups continue organizing clandestine immigration. They call it Aliyah Bet. You sneak onto one of these boats in the dead of night, wooden hulls, overcrowded decks, desperate passengers, children wrapped in blankets, mothers holding passports from dead countries. One ship, Patria, is commandeered by the British in 1940. They try to deport the refugees to Mauritius. The Haganah plants a bomb to disable the ship just enough to stop it, not sink it. But the explosion goes wrong. The Patriot sinks in Haifa harbor. Over 200 Jews drown. It's tragedy stitched inside resistance, wrapped in desperation. You stand at the dock the next morning. The sea is still, too still. And yet, the Yishuv keeps building. During the war years, Jewish institutions expand like never before. You walk into a cooperative bakery in Petah Tikva. The line wraps around the block. Flour is rationed, but spirits aren't. One woman jokes, "We're feeding a future state on breadcrumbs." Tel Aviv becomes a bustling hub, full of dance halls, newspapers, and ration cards. Children recite Hebrew poems. Farmers plant citrus by moonlight. Even as Europe burns, the Zionist dream intensifies. David Ben-Gurion's mantra spreads, "We will fight the war as if there is no white paper, and fight the white paper as if there is no war." You hear it echoed everywhere, from teachers, soldiers, postal workers. even teenagers learning Morse code behind locked classroom doors. Meanwhile, tensions with the British simmer again. The Yishuv helped fight Hitler. Now they want something in return. Open emigration, statehood, recognition, but the British are exhausted. Bankrupt, bleeding from war, they offer nothing. In 1944, the Irgun resumes its underground war against the British. Bombings, sabotage, assassinations. The rules are gone. You find yourself in a smoky Tel Aviv cellar as a group of fighters plan a raid on a British police depot. They're armed with Sten guns, stolen uniforms, and a copy of Shakespeare. "You've got to learn English," one says, grinning. It's the language of both the empire and the enemy. That same year, a breakaway faction forms. Leahy, also known as the Stern Gang. Their tactics are even bolder, their ideology even fiercer. You overhear one recruit say, "The British are just another occupier. One more empire trying to manage a people it doesn't understand." Back on the Arab side, war fatigue blends with bitterness. The promised independence, the self-governance spoken of in vague mandate language, it still hasn't come. Land is still being bought. Refugees still arrive. And with each year, the fear of being replaced grows sharper. You sit in a Nazareth coffee house. A young Arab schoolteacher shows you his father's olive grove, now bordered by barbed wire and legal confusion. "They say we're not losing land," he mutters. "Only rights. But what's land without the right to stay on it?" By 1945, the war is over. Hitler is dead, but so are 6 million Jews. 6 million. The number hovers over every conversation now. A ghost too big for language. Zionist leaders present the case bluntly. If not Palestine, where? The world turned its back once. It cannot do so again. And so, pressure mounts on the British. In 1946, the Yishuv launches a coordinated campaign of resistance. The Haganah Irgun and Lahin Ormali rivals coordinate attacks in what becomes known as the Jewish resistance movement. You hear of bridges bombed across the country, train lines cut, and British morale shredded like old fabric. Then, July 22, 1946, the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, home to the British administrative headquarters, is bombed by the Irgun. You're a few blocks away. The explosion is deafening. Smoke mushrooms into the sky. 91 people die: British, Arabs, Jews, civilians, soldiers, clerks. The building collapses. So does the last illusion that control can be maintained quietly. The British are stunned. Outraged, the Irgun claims it issued a warning. The British say it wasn't enough. History can't decide. You sift through the rubble the next day. The smell is thick. Papers drift like feathers through the ruined halls. One reads, "Mandate Office, Internal Memo." You tuck it into your coat. After that, there's no turning back. The British start mass arrests. Zionist leaders are jailed or sent to Cyprus. Curfews sweep across cities. The Jewish Agency is raided, but the tide has turned. Britain can still punish, but it cannot persuade. Historians still argue whether the mandate might have survived with reform. Maybe if the British had allowed open immigration after the Holocaust. Maybe if Arab self-rule had been advanced earlier. Maybe if someone had actually read the room. But now, you feel it crumbling. You sit at a Tel Aviv bus stop. Next to you, a survivor from Buchenwald stares at the sidewalk, her hands shaking. Across the street, a British soldier leans against a jeep, looking utterly lost. And in the middle of it all, Palestine waits crowded, grieving, breathless. The mandate's days are numbered. You just don't know the number yet. You're balancing on the edge of a loading dock in Haifa, watching a group of men haul crates of oranges onto a battered British steamer. The air smells like salt and citrus. Somewhere in the hills behind you, gunfire cracks like dry wood snapping. It's 1947, and Palestine isn't just tense anymore, it's combustible. The British, they've had enough. You pass a British officer scribbling in a logbook, pausing only to glare at a boy handing out flyers in Hebrew. He's tired. They all are. Tired of sabotage. Tired of curfews. Tired of being the only ones who still pretend this mandate has a future. By now, you know the rhythms. A bombing here, a raid there, leaflets, funerals, arrests, more funerals. It's a cycle that's spinning faster and faster, and the British have decided they don't want to be in the middle when it finally snaps. So, they kick the problem upstairs to the world. To the newly formed United Nations. You're in a dusty Tel Aviv apartment the day the news crackles over the radio. Britain will hand the question of Palestine to the UN. The room goes silent. Then someone whispers, "Now the world must decide." And so it does. You follow the debate like it's a courtroom drama. The UN forms a special committee, UNSCOP, delegates from 11 countries. They tour Palestine, take testimony from Arabs, Jews, and even some awkward British clerks who just want to go home and make tea. They visit kibbutzim, Arab towns, refugee camps. You trail them through Haifa's port, past signs in multiple languages warning about quarantine, identity checks, disease. The delegates nod, take notes, and try not to cry when survivors of the Holocaust show them numbers. Tattooed on forearms and letters from siblings who no longer exist. The Arab Higher Committee boycotts the process. There can be no negotiation with colonizers or occupiers, one leader declares. You sit in a smoky cafe in Jaffa, where a group of young men tear up a newspaper with the word partition on the front page. But the committee finishes its work and presents two plans. A majority report, calling for partition 2 states, one Jewish, one Arab, and a minority report calling for a single binational state. You know which one the world will back. Here's your quirky tidbit. The UNCOP delegates weren't allowed to accept gifts. But in a gesture of goodwill, one kibbutz offered them 37 different kinds of pickled vegetables anyway. One delegate later admitted the taste of beet kvass haunted him for weeks. The partition plan draws a jagged line through the land. The Jewish state will get about 55% of Palestine, though most of it is desert. The Arab state will get 45%, Jerusalem. It'll be international, like a city on probation. You trace the map with your finger. It winds awkwardly through farmland, past towns that will soon be battlefields. It feels surgical, as if identity can be excised with a ruler. You sit with a group of Jewish leaders in Tel Aviv as they digest the proposal. Some cheer, some weep, some stare into space. Ben-Gurion stands and says quietly, "It's not perfect, but it's something." You find yourself in a village near Nablus the next day. The mood is different, angry, fatalistic. They are giving away our land, a farmer spits. Who gave them the right? Another adds, "We will not accept it. Not today, not ever." Historians still argue whether Arab leaders should have accepted the partition. Some say it was their best chance. Others say the offer was never fair to begin with. Either way, the refusal sets the next phase in motion. On November 29, 1947, the UN votes. 33 in favor, 13 against, 10 abstentions, partition passes. In Tel Aviv, crowds pour into the streets, dancing, singing, fireworks. You're pulled into a circle of strangers, chanting Am Yisrael Chitha. People of Israel, live. Someone hands you a bottle. It tastes like dust and relief. In Arab cities, the mood is fire, not fireworks. Riots begin that night. You see a shop in Haifa go up in flames. Shots echo in Jaffa. Jews are dragged off buses. Arab neighborhoods are shelled in return. What began as politics has turned, once again, into violence. You witness it firsthand. Road ambushes, retaliatory bombings, assassinations. In Jerusalem, buses now have sandbags. In rural areas, every hill becomes a potential sniper's perch. The mandate is still technically in effect, but you'd never know it by looking. The Yishuv mobilizes fast. The Haganah expands into a real army. You stand beside a young recruit in a muddy trench who says, "We built this land with our hands. Now we have to hold it with our teeth." The Ergen and Lehi ramp up their operations. Not just defense now, but offensive strikes on Arab targets, some civilian. You flinch at the headlines. You start skipping some of them. On the Arab side, irregular fighters, many from surrounding countries, begin entering Palestine. They form militias under the name Arab Liberation Army, poorly equipped but fierce. You meet a Syrian volunteer who says, "This isn't a war, it's a return." But there's no real coordination. Arab villages defend themselves individually. Leadership is fragmented. Supplies are short. And the British, they're packing. That's right, by spring 1948, British forces begin their slow withdrawal. You watch as a Union Jack is lowered for the last time in one outpost, while behind it, rival militias are already jockeying for control of the same hill. Here's a bureaucratic nugget for you. When the British withdrew from the Palestine Broadcasting Service in Jerusalem, they reportedly smashed every microphone and took all the scripts with them. "If we can't have a voice here," one engineer joked, "no one will." The clock ticks toward May 14th, 1948. Ben Gurion is preparing for something enormous. You attend a secret meeting in Tel Aviv where leaders argue over words like borders and religion and constitution. No one knows what will happen tomorrow, but they know it has to happen. And the Arabs, they know too. They hear the speeches, see the weapons piling up. They watch the British leave and the vacuum swell. You stand on a hill outside Tiberias, watching the sun set over the Sea of Galilee. The silence is thick, like the moment before a storm. In the valley below, smoke rises from a skirmish. You realize, with a quiet chill, that the mandate is ending not with dignity, but with dread. And beneath that dread, a slow wave begins to form, a wave of flight. Palestinian Arabs begin to flee villages caught in the crossfire. Some leave out of fear, others are expelled. You meet a family walking toward Lebanon, 7 people, 1 donkey, a single suitcase. The grandmother clutches a key. "We'll be back by summer," she says. You want to believe her, but you don't. The British keep retreating. Maps are rolled up, files burned. Barracks abandoned. Their empire once spanned the globe. Now, it's leaving behind chalk lines on stone and ghosts in every corridor. May 14th arrives. You're in a crowded Tel Aviv building when David Ben Gurion declares the establishment of the State of Israel. He stands at a microphone and reads slowly. "Clearly, we hereby declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Israel to be known as the State of Israel." The room erupts. Applause, tears, hugs. A small orchestra plays Hatikva, but outside, gunfire begins almost immediately. War has arrived. Again, that very night, 5 Arab armies prepared to invade. The mandate is officially over, and what comes next will shape every map, every memory, and every headline for generations. You're standing on the roof of a half-finished building in Tel Aviv. Below, the city is a beehive, sirens blaring, people shouting, someone dragging sandbags across a sidewalk. It's May 15th, 1948, just one day after Israel declared independence. But there's no champagne left in the bottle, because now, war has begun. At midnight, the British mandate officially ends. At dawn, the armies of Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq invade. You watch the sky over Ramat Gan turn gray as Egyptian planes drop their first bombs. You flinch at the sound, but there's nowhere to hide. This is war, and you're already inside it. The new State of Israel. It's a day old. The army barely exists. Ammunition is scarce. Half the soldiers have never fired a gun. One brigade trains with broomsticks because they don't have enough rifles. Another is equipped with homemade armored truck scrap metal bolted onto farm equipment. And yet, the Yishuv fights back. You follow a young Palmach unit as it heads south to the Negev. They march beside camels, their boots held together with tape. One soldier hums a lullaby between bursts of gunfire. "If we win," he says, "it'll be by miracle and mosquito net." The Arab forces are larger, better equipped, and coordinated on paper. But in practice, things aren't so simple. Syria invades from the northeast but stalls quickly. Lebanon sends token troops. Iraq's forces are enthusiastic but badly organized. Jordan's Arab Legion, however, is a different story: professional, disciplined, and led by British officers. Their focus, Jerusalem. You hitch a ride on a supply convoy heading for the besieged Jewish neighborhoods in the city. The road to Jerusalem is a death trap: narrow, steep, constantly ambushed. Every curve could be your last. You make it just past Latron before the shooting starts. The truck behind you explodes. The one in front gets stuck in a ditch. You leap for cover, crawling under thorn bushes while bullets slap the air. A medic beside you mutters prayers in 3 languages. Eventually, you crawl into Jerusalem through a back road carved into the hills later, called the Burma Road. It's a miracle of logistics and desperation, built by hand in days, allowing supplies to reach the starving population inside. You enter the old city just as the fighting reaches its climax. Jordan's Arab Legion storms the Jewish quarter. House by house, street by street, they advance. After days of siege, the Jewish fighters surrender. Civilians are evacuated. Homes are left behind. You watch a rabbi hide a Torah scroll behind a false wall before leaving. "We'll return," he says, "eventually." Historians still debate whether the Arab armies intended to destroy the new Jewish state or simply support their Palestinian allies and protect Arab interests. Some argue they were ill-prepared and hesitant. Others say they underestimated Zionist resistance. Regardless, the war continues. You spend a day in a refugee camp outside Acre. Thousands of Palestinian Arabs are there fleeing battles, shelling rumors. Some were expelled by Israeli forces. Others fled in panic, believing they'd return in days. They didn't pack for exile. They packed for a weekend. One woman shows you the deed to her house. Another clutches a key and a faded family photo. They refuse to call it exile. "It's just temporary," one man says. "The Arab armies will win, and we'll go home." But as the weeks pass, hope begins to curdle. Israel isn't falling. In fact, it's gaining ground. The IDF's Real Defense Forces formed by merging Haganah Rugen and Lehi units. Not without drama. The Irgun wants independence, but Ben-Gurion insists on one central command. When the Irgun ship, Altalena, arrives with weapons and volunteers, a standoff ensues. You're on the Tel Aviv beach when Israeli soldiers, yes, Jewish soldiers firing at other Jewish fighters, shell the ship. Smoke pours into the sky. The dream of unity nearly breaks before it even begins. The message is clear: one state, one army, no militias. Back on the front, Israel pushes outward. In the north, Operation Dekel captures Nazareth and the Galilee. In the south, Operation Yov breaks the Egyptian siege of the Negev. In the center, the road to Jerusalem remains contested, but supplies now flow. And then comes the truce. The UN negotiates a ceasefire in June 1948. For a few weeks, the guns fall silent. You exhale for the first time in what feels like years. But no one trusts the quiet. Both sides use the break to rearm. Israel receives secret shipments from Czechoslovakia rifles, planes, even tanks. You visit an airstrip where pilots are being trained by war-weary Americans and former RAF officers. One Czech mechanic teaches a Sabra teenager how to patch bullet holes with chewing gum and prayer. Meanwhile, the Arab armies regroup. But politics splinter them: rivalries between Arab leaders, disputes over who commands what. The coordination that might have changed the war never materializes. The truce ends and fighting resumes. This time, Israel goes on the offensive. In the south, they surround Egyptian forces near Fallujah. In the north, they secure the Upper Galilee. Town after town falls, some without resistance, others after fierce battles. You walk through Lida and Ram after their capture. The streets are empty. The air tastes like silence. Tens of thousands of Arabs are gone, some expelled, some fled. Israeli soldiers patrol the streets. The radio calls it liberation. But others call it Nakba, the catastrophe. Historians still argue the nature of this exodus. Was it planned ethnic cleansing? A tragic outcome of war? A little of both. No one agrees. But the scale is undeniable. Over 700,000 Palestinians displaced. You visit one of the new Mabera transit camps built for Jewish immigrants and refugees. But they're not only for Holocaust survivors now. Jews from Arab countries are beginning to arrive too, driven out by riots, fear, and anti-Zionist backlash. From Baghdad to Casablanca, synagogues are burned, lives uprooted, passports revoked. You meet a family from Yemen who arrived with nothing but a single copper pot and a scroll wrapped in cloth. They call it Aliyah, but you can see the trauma under their smiles. The new state is overwhelmed. Camps overflow. Tents multiply. You walk between rows of new arrivals, Mazrahi, Sephardi, carrying their own version of loss, each now folded into the same uncertain future. Meanwhile, the war grinds to a halt. One by one, Arab states sign armistice agreements. Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria. No peace treaties, just exhausted silence. By early 1949, the fighting ends. Israel holds 78% of Mandate Palestine, more than the UN partition plan had offered. Jordan holds the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Egypt holds the Gaza Strip. No Palestinian state is created. Jerusalem is divided, barbed wire and snipers mark the invisible line. You stand at the edge of no man's land, watching two boys on opposite sides throw rocks toward each other, then laugh like maybe they don't know what they've inherited. And the British. They're gone. Left behind are the remnants of empire. Railroad tracks leading nowhere. Red postal boxes, English-language street signs, and tea shops that no one visits anymore. You return to that same rooftop in Tel Aviv where it all began. Now the city looks different, busier, rougher, louder. Babies cry, radios crackle, flags flutter from balconies. But in your chest, the ache remains. Because something else was left behind too. A people without a state. A trauma without a timeline. And a map, once carefully drawn, now bleeding at the edges. You're wandering through a rocky olive grove on a quiet hillside near Ramallah. The war is technically over. The guns have fallen silent. But the ground still groans underfoot, like it hasn't yet decided who belongs to it. It's early 1949. The armistices are signed. Borders not final, not recognized, but real enough, far drawn. And now, the Middle East is filled with ghosts. The first and loudest are the displaced. You visit one of the largest refugee camps just outside of Amman. What used to be fields are now rows of tents and tin roofs held down with stones. Children run barefoot between food lines. Mothers cook lentils over open fires. One man holds a faded photograph of his vineyard in Jaffa and says softly, "I still know every tree." You realize quickly, no one here calls themselves refugee. They say returnee. They still carry the keys to homes they no longer own. This is the birth of the Palestinian refugee crisis. More than 700,000 Palestinians displaced, many by fear, some by force. Some fled under fire. Some were told to evacuate temporarily. Others were driven out or never allowed to return after leaving. The result? An enduring political wound that even now, decades later, refuses to scab. And here's your quirky tidbit. In the early years of the camps, Some Palestinian refugees held on to the oddest items: garbage keys, garden tools, or even light switches from their homes. Not out of practicality, just proof. Proof that they existed somewhere once. You board a rickety UN truck bringing supplies. The workers tell you about their new organization, UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine. Refugees in the Near East. It's created to handle the crisis. But even they don't know they'll still be around 70 years later. Meanwhile, in Israel, a different kind of transformation is underway. You walk into a transit camp in the Negev. It's dusty, sun-bleached, and overflowing. The newcomers here aren't Holocaust survivors. They're Jews from Iraq, Egypt, Libya, Yemen. Whole families arrive with little more than oral traditions and ritual memories. You watch a grandmother from Baghdad trying to explain to a Polish doctor why she believes her son was cursed by a jealous neighbor. You feel, in that moment, the vast ocean of culture within Judaism itself. Israel's first government under Ben-Gurion faces an impossible task, turning a fragile, war-born state into a functioning society. That means absorbing hundreds of thousands of immigrants, building cities, making laws, fending off another war that always feels about 2 headlines away. You stroll through a construction site in Haifa, where a Romanian engineer is arguing with a Moroccan foreman, while an Ethiopian teenager reads Hebrew aloud from a textbook under scaffolding. It's chaos, but it's nation-building chaos. The Knesset is formed. A provisional constitution, the basic laws, is drafted. Elections are held. Israel applies for and receives UN membership. Historians still argue whether Israel's birth was a miracle, a mistake, or a historical inevitability. Some call it the last European-style settler project. Others, the rebirth of a 2,000-year-old homeland. Most agreed was all of those things, and none of them, depending on who's holding the map. In the West Bank, things take a different path. Jordan annexes the territory, including East Jerusalem. King Abdullah wants to unify his kingdom, and the move has support from some Palestinian leaders, but fierce opposition from others. You attend a meeting in Nablus where nationalists argue bitterly. He saved the land from the Zionists, one says. He stole it from the people, replies another. The room nearly splits in half. Jordan's rule brings some stability, yes, but no independent Palestine. You meet a young Palestinian teacher who says, "We have classrooms and roads, but not history. Not yet." In Gaza, Egypt maintains control, but doesn't annex. The Strip becomes a narrow, overcrowded corridor of refugees, surrounded by barbed wire and guarded checkpoints. Life there is raw, tense, impermanent. You lean against a stone wall and listen to a boy recite his multiplication tables beside a rusted tank. His mother corrects his Hebrew pronunciation through tears. He will learn their language, she says, because they won't let us speak ours. Meanwhile, in Israel, a cultural rift is growing. European Jews Ashkenazim tend to dominate the political, academic, and military elite. Jews from the Middle East Mizrahim often find themselves sidelined, housed in peripheral towns, overlooked in policy and press. You visit a development town in the Galilee. The streets are unpaved. The water pressure barely exists. The radio plays Yiddish lullabies, even though no one here speaks Yiddish. One father from Casablanca asks bitterly, "Did we come to a homeland or another kind of exile?" Ben-Gurion famously calls these immigrants the ingathering of the exiles. But integration is bumpy. Prejudice, class divides, even food become fault lines. Still, the project pushes forward. Infrastructure booms. Hebrew becomes a national language, even as Moroccan, Arabic, Ladino, and Judeo-Persian echo from balconies. The army becomes a social mixer boot camp in the morning, open by night. You march with a unit where a Russian violinist shares tent space with a Kurdish shepherd. They hate each other's soup butt. They learn to march in time. And then, Jerusalem, divided yet alive. The western half, Israeli. The eastern half, Jordanian. You walk along the barbed wire fence that cuts through what used to be neighborhoods. Children on both sides dare each other to throw rocks across and then run. Here's something strange. In 1949, Israel makes Jerusalem its capital even, though half the city, including the Old City and the holy sites, remains outside its control. The UN doesn't recognize the move. Neither does almost anyone else. But the declaration stands. You visit the Knesset when it's still in a converted cinema. One minister sighs, "The capital is where we say it is," even if the world says otherwise. And so, two cities emerge: Jerusalem and Al-Quds, mirrors of each other, each incomplete, each wounded. By the early 1950s, something like a status quo begins to settle. Borders freeze into armistice lines later called the Green Line. Not peace. Not final. Just pause. Palestinians remain in exile, scattered in camps across Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Gaza. Some are granted citizenship. Most are not. Israel begins to heal, but also hardens, builds, expands, remembers, and prepares. You feel it in the air. A nation born with trauma in its marrow, and vigilance stitched into its future. And over every map, every speech, every silence, one word begins to echo: return. Return to what? To where? To a house that may not exist anymore. To a land whose name shifts depending on which language you speak. Historians still argue what return should mean. But in the hearts of millions on both sides, not a policy. It's a prayer. You end the day in Jerusalem, sitting beneath a fig tree that leans over the Green Line. On one side, a synagogue bell. On the other, a call to prayer. And for one moment, it's quiet. But you know the silence is borrowed. Soon, it will break again. You're walking the rim of a canyon in southern Israel, boots crunching over the sun-blasted stone. It's 1956 now. The landscape is all heat and hush. But beneath the stillness, something stirs: discontent, strategy, ambition. A decade has passed since the War of 1948, and already the map is shifting again. You glance at a border fence along the edge of the Negev. On the other side lies Egypt. And beyond that, the Sinai Peninsula, vast, empty, and about to become the stage for another act in this long, strange play. Because here's what's happening. The Suez Canal has been nationalized. President Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, sharp-suited and steel-eyed, announces in July 1956 that the Suez Canal, until now controlled by British and French interests, belongs to Egypt. It's a bold move. Framed as decolonization, as Arab pride, as a way to fund the Aswan Dam and push Britain fully off the regional chessboard. But Britain and France don't take it lightly, and neither does Israel. Behind closed doors, something unusual begins to unfold. Israel, France, and Britain hatch a secret plan, literally, in a villa near Paris. The idea: Israel will invade the Sinai. Britain and France will then intervene under the pretense of protecting the canal, demand a ceasefire, and retake control. You're in a Tel Aviv office where Israeli generals trace the routes across the desert in pencil. "We'll strike fast," one says. Then let the Europeans pretend to play hero. And so, on October 29, 1956, Israel invades. You ride in a jeep bouncing through the dunes. Israeli paratroopers seize key positions, including the Mitla Pass. French and British warships soon follow. Port Said is bombarded. It seems like a colonial comeback tour, only this time. No one sent the invitation. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Israeli paratroopers trained for desert jumps by leaping off moving trucks near Be'er Sheva while being sprayed with sand by fellow soldiers wielding modified vacuum cleaners. Back on the battlefield, the operation is swift and militarily a success. Israel pushes through Sinai in days. The Egyptian army retreats in disarray. You find yourself in an abandoned base where half-cooked lentils still steam in a mess tin beside a knocked-over cot. But the victory is short-lived because the world responds with fury. The United States and the Soviet Union's sworn enemies on nearly everything both oppose the invasion. President Eisenhower is livid. He threatens sanctions on Israel. The British and French face global embarrassment. The Cold War suddenly overrides colonial nostalgia. The three allies are forced to withdraw. Israel pulls back from the Sinai by March 1957, in exchange for U.S. assurances of open access to the Gulf of Aqaba and the placement of a UN peacekeeping force in Sinai. It's a strange moment. Israel gained militarily, but was reined in politically. Britain and France realize their imperial twilight is almost complete. And Egypt? Egypt emerges bloodied but triumphant, and Image Nasser is now an Arab hero. You travel to Cairo and find posters of him everywhere on buses, billboards, even soda bottles. He stood up to the West, one vendor tells you proudly. He spoke for us all. But beneath the pride is an undercurrent of fear, because Arab nationalism is now not just a dream, but a force. Nasser calls for Pan-Arab unity. He forms a short-lived political union with Syria, the United Arab Republic. He positions himself as the leader of a broader anti-imperialist, anti-Zionist coalition. Palestinian refugees hear him and hope. You sit in a cafe in the Shatila camp in Lebanon. A teenage boy, born after 1948, speaks of his home in Haifa. My father says we will return, he insists. We are not Lebanese. We are not guests. We are waiting. But for most refugees, life is now decades of waiting. UNRWA schools, food rations, temporary housing that has become permanent. In Gaza, under Egyptian administration, there is poverty and overcrowding. In the West Bank, now annexed by Jordan, Palestinians are granted citizenship but little say in politics. Historians still argue, could a Palestinian state have been established in these territories during this time between 1948 and 1967 if Arab leaders had wanted it more than they feared it? You stroll through East Jerusalem in 1960. It's Jordanian-controlled, modest, quiet. Tourists visit Christian holy sites, but the old city is in slow decline. There's little investment, few grand plans. Palestinians here feel more ruled than represented. Meanwhile, across the barbed wire, West Jerusalem glows with construction. Israel is thriving, or at least striving. New immigrants pour in. Universities expand. Roads stretch across dusty hills. Hebrew is now dominant. The army trains constantly. The ethos, preparedness, always. You join a young Israeli family on their first trip to Eilat. It's a dusty coastal town, barely developed, but they treat it like the Riviera. It's ours, the father says, sipping tea from a thermos. We built it from nothing. Still, the country isn't without strain. Mizrahi Jews face systemic discrimination. Neighborhoods divide along ethnic lines. Knesset debates who is really Jewish. Religious and secular tensions flare. But one thing unites almost everyone: fear of the next war. Because border skirmishes never stopped. Fedayeen raids from Gaza, retaliatory Israeli strikes, water disputes along the Syrian border, airspace violations. Every month brings something sharp. And the Palestinian movement is changing too. In 1964, the Palestine Liberation Organization is formed with Egyptian support. Its charter speaks of liberation through armed struggle. You attend its first meeting, held in Jerusalem under Jordanian control. Delegates argue over tactics. One says, if we wait for Arab leaders, we wait forever. And something else begins to shift identity. You start to hear the word Palestinian used more forcefully, not just as a geographic label, but as a national one. It's no longer simply Arab unity. It's a distinct claim to peoplehood, to history, to the right of return. Here's a lesser-known twist. Early Israeli intelligence actually supported the idea of a separate Palestinian identity, believing it could weaken broader Arab nationalism. But that strategy quickly backfired. By the mid-1960s, Fatah, led by Yasser Arafat, begins launching its own raids into Israel. Small, at first symbolic, almost theatrical, but they mark a new era. The conflict is no longer just state to state, it's people to people, ideology against ideology. In Israel, the public mood is tense. You walk through a Jerusalem market and hear the same refrain from different mouths. It's coming, another war. This time, bigger. And the borders feel tighter, more fortified. The green line isn't a peace line, it's a wound. One side calls it security, the other, occupation. Historians still argue what might have prevented the 1967 war: more diplomacy, fewer raids, less arrogance. But hindsight, as usual, arrives too late. You end your journey on a small ridge overlooking the Golan Heights. The wind is sharp. You can see the Galilee below, shimmering under a tired sun. And you feel it, that electric stillness before a storm. Everyone knows something is coming. They just don't know that by the time it's over, the map will look nothing like it does now. You're standing on a balcony in West Jerusalem in early June 1967, sipping tea that's gone cold. The air is humid with tension. Radios mumble from every open window. The headlines are war, war, and maybe war tomorrow. You're not the only one waiting. Across the region, armies mass near borders. Egypt closes the Straits of Tiran, Israel's lifeline to the Red Sea. Syrian artillery shells Israeli villages from the Golan Heights. Jordan signs a defense pact with Egypt. Arab radio stations blare patriotic anthems while newspapers print maps of a future without Israel. And in Tel Aviv, people dig trenches. Israel knows it's surrounded, but it also believes in surprise. And on the morning of June 5, 1967, it unleashes Operation Focus. You're crouched beside an airfield as Israeli jets roar. It's overhead, nearly 200 of them disappearing into the sky. Hours later, they return, without many losses. And with stunning news, most of the Egyptian Air Force is destroyed on the ground. In just a few hours, Israel neutralizes the air forces of Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. The skies are theirs. And with that, the 6-day war begins. You're with a paratrooper unit heading toward the Sinai. The heat is cruel, but spirits are high. We don't have time for fear, one soldier tells you. Only fuel. Within 3 days, the entire Sinai Peninsula falls into Israeli hands. You follow a column of tanks rumbling through Raif and onto the dunes, past abandoned Egyptian barracks where coffee still steams and orders lie half-written. Meanwhile, Jordan attacks West Jerusalem. You race through narrow streets under shellfire, ducking past sandbagged windows. Israeli forces respond fast and brutal. And on June 7th, something unthinkable happens. Israeli paratroopers reach the old city of Jerusalem. You slip through the Lion's Gate with them. The alleys echo with the sound of boots and gunfire. Then silence. At the Western Wall, men weep. Soldiers pray, kiss the stones. Some scribble notes and stuff them into the cracks. The chief rabbi blows a shofar. In that moment, for the first time since 1948, Jews control the old city. You hear a commander radio in, "The Temple Mount is in our hands." The voice shakes. Here's your quirky detail. The paratroopers weren't even fully sure how to reach the Western Wall. One reportedly followed the sound of gunfire. Another, the smell of jasmine, and both got lost in winding alleys until an old Armenian shopkeeper pointed the way. In the north, Israel turns to the Golan Heights. Syrian artillery has been tormenting the Galilee for years. Now, Israel pushes back uphill through minefields under heavy fire. You hike beside infantry weaving through thickets and volcanic rock. The fighting is fierce, but by June 10th, Israel captures the Golan. And then, the war ends. 6 days, that's all it took. When the dust settles, the map is unrecognizable. Israel now controls the West Bank, East Jerusalem, Gaza Strip, Sinai Peninsula, and Golan Heights. It triples in size overnight. Some call it a miracle, others an occupation. All agreed historic. Historians still argue whether the war was defensive, preemptive, expansionist, or all of the above. But what matters more is what it became, the foundation of a new phase of the conflict. Because victory brings not peace, but questions. You walk through Nablus as Israeli troops establish their first checkpoints. The occupation begins awkwardly part military, part municipal. Some Palestinians are stunned, others are furious. A few still believe Arab armies will return tomorrow. They don't. And so, a slow resistance begins. Quiet at first, general strikes, protests, graffiti. You hear whispers in alleyways. Intifada, not yet a name, but a mood. At the same time, Israel faces another unexpected reality. The land now holds over 1 million Palestinians. Most are stateless. Most cannot leave. Most do not want to be ruled by a government they did not elect. In Gaza, things are worse. Refugee camps swell. Unemployment skyrockets. The Israeli military governs with increasing force. You watch a teenage boy questioned for hours over a painted slogan. His crime, a flag scrawled in chalk. Meanwhile, Jewish settlements begin. You attend a planning meeting near Hebron. The logic is part security, part ideology. This land is ours, one settler says. Not by politics, by history. A soldier standing nearby doesn't look convinced. Some settlements are small, just a few caravans. Others, well-funded and expanding. The government waffles. Build. Freeze. Avoid attention. But settlers go anyway. Here's your fringe tidbit. The first Israeli settlers in Hebron lived in a hotel, posing as tourists while quietly lobbying for permanent housing. One even pretended to be a honeymooner, while sneaking in concrete blocks at night. Back in East Jerusalem, the city is now under full Israeli control. Municipal borders are redrawn. Arab residents are offered permanent residency, not citizenship. You watch bureaucrats argue over street signs: Hebrew first, Arabic both. Tourism booms. So does tension. Some Palestinians see the annexation as theft. Others try to adapt. You meet a shopkeeper in the Muslim quarter who updates his receipt printer but still keeps his old Jordanian license framed on the wall. Across the region, the Arab world is in shock. Nasser resigns, then is begged to return. Syria blames conspiracies. Jordan seethes, but knows it cannot retake the West Bank. Palestinian despair begins to twist into something else, something darker. And the plow grows. Now based in Jordan and later Lebanon, it shifts from symbolic gestures to coordinated guerrilla tactics. Hijackings, ambushes, border raids. You sit in a refugee camp in southern Lebanon where kids train with sticks, pretending they're rifles. We have no tanks, one boy says, but we have time. Historians still argue whether the Six-Day War created the occupation or merely exposed it. Whether it cemented Israel's survival or planted the seeds of its future isolation. But you, standing on the roof of an East Jerusalem apartment in 1968, feel something no map can show. Uncertainty tightening its grip like a storm just over the horizon. Israel celebrates unity. The Arab world mourns humiliation. The Palestinians simmer. And somewhere in the distance, something begins to rise. Not quite visible, not yet named, but it will come. You're sitting in a smoky living room in Amman in 1970. Eating lukewarm rice and listening to a transistor radio crackling between Egyptian ballads and muffled news updates. The men around you are all watching the door. Not because they're expecting guests, because they're expecting soldiers. The city is tense, not with war between states, but war within. Welcome to Black September. After the Six-Day War, the Palestinian movement, displaced, scattered, angry, had regrouped. The PLO, now based in Jordan, had become not just a resistance force, but a parallel power. It set up camps, checkpoints, even collected its own taxes in parts of the country. You travel to the edge of a Palestinian camp outside Irbid. There's a school run by the PLO, a clinic with posters of Che Guevara, and a shooting range where teenagers practice with rifles taller than they are. One hands you a pamphlet. This time, he says, we don't run. But King Hussein sees a challenge to his rule, and by September 1970, it boils over. You duck behind a crumbling wall as Jordanian tanks roll into refugee neighborhoods. The army shells camps. The PLO fights back, but it's not an equal fight. In just days, thousands are killed, mostly Palestinians. Historians still debate the numbers. They also debate the timing. Could this have been avoided? Should the PLO have pulled back? Should Hussein have negotiated longer? Either way, the PLO is expelled. You join a convoy of fighters heading to Lebanon, many wounded, all silent. Jordan is lost to them now, and Lebanon will soon become a new stage for an even bloodier act. Meanwhile, Israel is watching all this from behind a tightly wound fence. Its control over the West Bank and Gaza continues, but so does resistance. In the occupied territories, life is a slow burn. You wander through a West Bank village where IDF patrols are as common as crows. Children grow up recognizing the sound of army jeeps the way others recognize lullabies. One boy tells you he knows how many seconds between knock and kick when soldiers come. Palestinians begin organizing at the grassroots. Not just armed groups, but unions, schools, even secret newspapers. You sit in a kitchen where women roll grape leaves and discuss literacy campaigns alongside political slogans. Meanwhile, settlers keep arriving. The Israeli government oscillates, sometimes encouraging, pretending not to notice, but the facts on the ground multiply. Hilltops become neighborhoods. Roads are built with military convoys in tow. You climb a slope in Samaria where a handful of families plant olive trees next to prefab homes. History starts here, one settler says. Also lunch if you're staying. Not all Israelis are comfortable with this. You attend a rally in Tel Aviv where university students chant, "Peace now." Peace now. Their parents sigh. Their grandparents say, "We just got this country. Now you want to carve it up?" And then, 1973 arrives. You're in a dusty barracks in the Negev when sirens wail. It's Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. Most of Israel is fasting, praying, quiet. Then suddenly Egypt and Syria launch a surprise attack. You grab a helmet and climb into a jeep headed for the Golan Heights. It's chaos. Israeli outposts are overrun. The Egyptians cross the Suez Canal in rubber dinghies under cover of 1,000 guns. You watch tanks go up in flames like tin toys. For days, Israel reels. The myth of invincibility built in 1967 shatters. You sit beside a young soldier in a trench who whispers, "We thought we'd never be surprised again." But Israel regroups, fights back. By the end of the war, it recaptures lost territory, even crosses the Suez Canal. But the trauma lingers. Here's your quirky tidbit. After the Yom Kippur War, some Israeli musicians began writing songs in minor keys, only claiming major chords felt dishonest. In the Arab world, despite military losses, there's a sense of redemption. Egypt, in particular, has regained dignity. Nasser is gone dead in 1970. In his place is Anwar Sadat, who knows when to change tactics. You're in a Cairo tea house when Sadat shocks the world. He will go to Jerusalem. The year is 1977. The images are surreal. The Egyptian president lands at Ben Gurion Airport, shakes hands, speaks to the Knesset, offers peace. You sit in stunned silence as Israelis, some skeptical, some tearful, watch their televisions. Is this real? A bus driver asks. Are we dreaming this? And in 1979, it happens. The Camp David Accords, a peace treaty. Egypt recognizes Israel. Israel agrees to withdraw from the Sinai. The handshake between Sadat and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin becomes a poster, a postage stamp, a promise. But not everyone is happy. In the Arab world, Sadat is branded a traitor. You hear crowds in Damascus chant, "No peace with Zion, no recognition." No negotiations. The PLO feels abandoned. Palestinians feel invisible. Even in Gaza, kids spit at a mural of the Nile. And in 1981, Sadat is assassinated. Historians still argue if Camp David was a model or a mirage, a real step toward peace or a deal that left Palestinians behind. Back in Israel, Begin has become prime minister. A former underground fighter, now the face of diplomacy. But also something else. Because in 1982, he orders an invasion of Lebanon. The goal, to root out the PLO, now based in southern Lebanon and increasingly active across Israel's northern border. But, like most plans, this one goes sideways quickly. You ride in a troop truck as Israeli forces push all the way to Beirut. It's not just border cleanup, it's full-scale war. The Lebanese civil war, already raging, collides with Israel's incursion, like two storms meeting over a burning field. You walk through ruins where 5 militias claim 5 overlapping allegiances. Then comes the horror: Sabra and Shatila. Israeli forces surround 2 Palestinian refugee camps in West Beirut. They let Lebanese Christian militias enter supposedly to root out fighters. Instead, civilians are massacred. Hundreds, maybe thousands. You arrive hours too late. The bodies are being hauled out in carts. Survivors are dazed, silent, smeared in grief. One woman cradles a cooking pot as if it were a child. Israel doesn't do the killing, but it enabled it. And inside Israel, outrage erupts. Tens of thousands march through Tel Aviv. Soldiers refuse orders. A commission of inquiry finds Defense Minister Ariel Sharon personally responsible for negligence. He resigns. It's a national reckoning. Historians still argue whether the Lebanon War was a necessary act of self-defense or a colonial overreach masked as security. You climb a rooftop in Haifa with an old man who fought in '48. He looks out at the sea and says, "We didn't dream of this." By the late 1980s, a generation of Palestinians has grown up under occupation. In Gaza and the West Bank, they know checkpoints, curfews, interrogations, but not a single day of sovereignty. And then it happens. In December 1987, the first Intifada begins. You see its spark in a refugee camp after a traffic accident involving an Israeli military vehicle. Protests erupt, then stones, then slogans. It spreads like fire on dry grass. You follow young boys hurling rocks at armored jeeps, women forming human shields, students publishing underground newspapers. A general strike cripples the economy. Palestinian flags wave defiantly, still illegal under Israeli law. The uprising is mostly unarmed, but Israel responds with force: mass arrests, beatings, live ammunition, rubber bullets. You spend a night in Gaza, crouched behind a wall, listening to tear gas canisters thud like distant drums. And yet, this feels different. It's not the PLO in exile, it's local, organic, young, and here's your strange, quiet fact. In the early weeks of the uprising, Israeli intelligence was so caught off guard, it reportedly thought the movement had been engineered by Syria. It hadn't. This is the ground shifting again, not with tanks, but with kitchen knives, spray paint, and song. And just beyond it all, the map waits, still torn, still bleeding, but once again, about to be redrawn. You're standing in the hallway of a dusty government building in Tunis. It's 1993, and you've just seen something that would have seemed absurd a decade ago. Palestinian officials in business suits passing around binders labeled Final Status. There are coffee cups, translators, a fax machine wheezing in the corner, and one phrase that keeps echoing: two-state solution, but rewind a bit. The first Intifada, still rumbling in the background, had changed everything. It wasn't crushed. It wasn't even defeated. But it had altered the narrative. The images of teenagers with stones confronting tanks didn't look like a war, they looked like a demand. A demand for dignity, for a future, for a state. You walk through a West Bank village during the height of the uprising. A father teaches his son algebra while explaining how to avoid rubber bullets. A local sheikh delivers both a Friday sermon and updates from the underground union leaders. Israel responds with a mix of force and reform. It bans Palestinian flags. It cracks down on protests, but it also slowly begins to talk. And the Palestinians, once fragmented, begin speaking with one voice. The Palestinian Authority, backed by the PLO, steered by Yasser Arafat, it becomes the designated interlocutor. Now, here's the twist. While the cameras point to Washington and Cairo, the real conversations happen in Oslo. Norway, snow, neutrality, waffles. Norwegian academics and diplomats quietly host secret talks between Israeli and Palestinian negotiators. No formal agenda, no press, just long walks, handwritten notes, and long, awkward silences over lukewarm fish stew. And somehow, works. By 1993, something unimaginable becomes very real. The Oslo Accords. You're in Washington, D.C. when it's announced. The world watches as Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin shake hands on the White House lawn, flanked by President Bill Clinton, who beams like a proud camp counselor. It's surreal. Arafat in his keffiyeh, Rabin in a dark suit. Enemies for decades now, smiling barely. The deal is not final status, not peace. It's interim. Palestinians will get limited self-rule in Gaza and parts of the West Bank. In return, the PLO recognizes Israel's right to exist, and both sides agree. More negotiations are coming. Historians still argue if Oslo was a breakthrough or a trap, a fragile miracle, a delay tactic dressed as diplomacy. But for now, hope flickers. You walk through the streets of Ramallah where kids are painting doves on cracked walls. You hear laughter in Gaza, full-bellied, unguarded. A girl hands you a sticker that reads, "Welcome, peace." Back in Tel Aviv, there are rallies. People chant Shalom Haver, goodbye friend. There's music, poetry, even cautious optimism. And then things fray. First, the extremes strike back. In 1994, a Jewish settler named Baruch Goldstein massacres 29 Palestinians at prayer in Hebron's Ibrahimi Mosque. You arrive hours later. The air is thick. No one speaks. Even the Israeli soldiers seem paralyzed. The wound cuts deep. Then come the suicide bombings. Hamas and Islamic Jihad launch attacks inside Israel. Buses, markets, cafes. The peace process begins to erode, one explosion at a time. And then comes a shock almost too heavy to hold. In 1995, Yitzhak Rabin is assassinated by an Israeli. You're at a candlelight vigil in Tel Aviv. Thousands of people stand silently. A teenager holds a sign that simply says, "We were so close." The man who signed the Oslo Accords is gone, and so is something else trust. In the years that follow, things unravel. You follow Arafat back to Gaza. The Palestinian Authority is established, but its governance is patchy, riddled with corruption and inefficiency. Israelis begin to lose faith. Palestinians feel betrayed. The checkpoints stay. The settlements grow. And then, the Second Intifada. In 2000, Israeli opposition leader Ariel Sharon visits the Temple Mount, Al-Harum al-Sharif. It's seen as a provocation. Protests erupt. Live fire is used. The uprising explodes angrier, bloodier than the first. This time, it's not mostly stones. It's rifles, car bombs, military invasions. You walk through Ganen after a fierce battle in 2002. The camp is flattened. Men search the rubble for family. A girl pulls a math textbook from the debris and hugs it like a teddy bear. Israel responds with Operation Defensive Shield, its largest military action in the West Bank since 1967. It builds a separation barrier, a wall to some, a fence to others. It winds through the land like a scar. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some segments of the barrier are covered in Banksy art, including one stencil of a girl floating over the wall with balloons. And then, Gaza. In 2005, Israel disengages. It pulls out soldiers and settlers from the Gaza Strip. Some see it as a step toward peace. Others call it unilateral, chaotic. Then, in 2006, Hamas wins Palestinian legislative elections. Tensions with Fatah explode. By 2007, Hamas seizes full control of Gaza. The Palestinian territories are now politically split. Hamas in Gaza, Fatah in the West Bank. Israel imposes a blockade. Egypt tightens its border. Gaza becomes isolated. And then come the wars, 2008, 2012, 2014, and beyond. Airstrikes, rockets, civilians caught in crossfire, hospitals overwhelmed, power cuts. Every war leaves the situation worse than the last. You're in Ashkelon during a rocket barrage, sheltering in a stairwell with strangers who offer you gum and gossip. You're in Gaza 2 weeks later, watching a boy build a kite from plastic bags and barbed wire. The dreams of Oslo feel impossibly distant, and yet, the idea of peace never quite dies. New generations rise, more cynical, more wired, more restless. They share videos, not manifestos, memes, not manifestos. Some joke, some cry. Some just keep going. You meet a Palestinian teenager in Ramallah who says, "We don't believe in politics. We believe in surviving the next week." You meet an Israeli college student in Haifa who says, "We just want quiet. For 1 year, maybe 2. Then we'll think bigger." Historians still argue what comes next. A two-state solution. A one-state reality. Confederation, collapse. Peace through fatigue. But tonight, the land is quiet. You lie down beside a fig tree on a hillside in the West Bank. To your left, Jerusalem, glowing. To your right, Jericho, shimmering in the heat haze. Somewhere nearby, a muezzin calls the hour. Somewhere else, a Sabbath candle flickers. Somewhere else, a child dreams in Arabic, another in Hebrew. And the stars, silent as ever, watch it all. The hills settle back into themselves. The roads, empty. The checkpoints blink red and green, but no one passes. The border fences hum like sleeping serpents under the stars. You stretch out in the dry grass, let the heat of the day fade from your skin, and listen to the far-off howl of a jackal, to the whisper of a breeze threading its way through olive branches older than empires. The land is tired, not just from the wars, but from the weight of story. From the prophets and pilgrims, the generals and gunmen. It carries memory the way old buildings carry smoke deep in the stones hidden in the grain. And you've walked 1,000 miles tonight. Through secret meetings and shattered walls, through speeches, maps, martyrs, and dreams. You've stood in refugee camps where history still lives in tin cans and keys. You've followed armored convoys and peace processions, funeral marches and festival drums. Now there's nothing left to do but rest. You close your eyes, let your thoughts slow, let your heartbeat match the rhythm of the desert. And maybe, just maybe, you carry a little more understanding now, not of right or wrong, winner or loser, but of how complicated hope can be, how tangled memory becomes when it's planted in contested soil. Sleep now. Let the questions float. Let the map go blurry. Because tomorrow, the world will still be arguing. But tonight, you've earned this stillness. You've earned this hush. Just stars above, just dust below. Just you, the story, and the dark.